This is Jack Maxey sitting in for Stephen K. Bannon. Today is August 8th, year of our Lord 2020. This is episode 324 of War Room Pandemic. This is a special Saturday episode called Pandemic National Town Hall, the Case for Hydroxy. I'd like to make a quick shout out to our broadcast partners. We have AVN News. We have Newsmax at night. We have the John Fredericks Radio Network. And we are blown through the Chinese firewall by G News, translated into Mandarin so that the Chinese people get to know what is going on in the world. We are very pleased to have a new guest here, Dr. James Todaro. He is a Columbia University graduate, an MD, and people who have been following hydroxychloroquine and the coronavirus pandemic have probably seen him commentating for months. He's been on top of this like no other, and we're very, very pleased to have him on this special show. Dr. Todaro, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for that really nice introduction, Jack.
No, listen, you've literally been one of the guys in the trenches. I think everybody who's been paying attention has probably been following you for a long time. One of the things that we're trying to do here as a town hall, we have questions that have been submitted over the last couple of days by our viewers. And the first question I have for you is question number 4 for AVN, if they want to throw it up. This is by @Spepyak. And the question is, what is the risk to people who already have heart issues? I've heard that hydroxychloroquine is risky to the heart and can cause arrhythmias. What info do you have on that? That's kind of a broad question, but no one could answer it better than you probably.
Sure, yeah, and it's a question that actually comes up quite a bit. And I think it really stems from the misinformation campaign that's been going against hydroxychloroquine since it was first mentioned as a therapeutic for COVID-19 in March. And like you said, I've been following this for a while, and so I've really been able to see this attack on hydroxychloroquine firsthand, because it was myself and a co-author who wrote the first Google document that became widely disseminated proposing chloroquine or hydroxychloroquine as a treatment. And it was shocking to me at how this seemingly good news would immediately drew the attention and ire of institutions, of the mainstream media, against hydroxychloroquine. And at first, the very quick message was, well, there's no evidence that it's effective. But that quickly transitioned over to it's dangerous. And they started off with mentioning the ocular side effects of the medication. So it's a well-known side effect of hydroxychloroquine that it can cause chloroquine retinopathy, which is damage to the retina, the back of your eyes. This misinformation was quickly dispelled, though, because and even the American Academy of Ophthalmology weighed in on this, but it really only can damage the eye after about 5 years of daily use, okay? And so it's not a real concern when you're talking about a short course of treatment for COVID-19. So then they moved on to the next reason that hydroxychloroquine is so dangerous, which is heart problems, okay? And where this kind of information started to spiral out of control, and this is actually in part of the World Health Organization, medical journals, including the NIH, Dr. Fauci as well. But hydroxychloroquine can prolong the QT interval. And what this is 2 points on an EKG that if they become separated by too much, if they become too prolonged, it can cause a heart arrhythmia, which means your heartbeat is out of sync. And in extremely rare cases, this can lead to death. Now, there's literally hundreds of medications that prolong the QT interval. Hundreds of them. And hydroxychloroquine is no different from many of those other commonly prescribed medications. Rheumatologists who have been prescribing hydroxychloroquine for decades, okay, for lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, they call it a daily multivitamin for patients with lupus because it's that safe. They weren't doing baseline EKGs on all their patients to make sure they weren't underlying heart arrhythmias or cardiac concerns before prescribing this medication. Nowadays, if you were to prescribe it without doing an EKG, you'd be considered medically negligent. And this is all just in the setting of COVID-19. Okay, so let's take a look at the actual data for how, how risky, how much side effects there are for the heart. with this medication. So there's a large systematic review, to my knowledge, it's the largest systematic review of cardiac toxicity from hydroxychloroquine. And what it did, it looked at all the studies, all the case reports, all the papers of cardiac toxicity from hydroxychloroquine from the years 1963 to 2017.
You're talking about the World Health Organization study, the cardiotoxicity study by the World Health Organization?
This is actually a meta-analysis that was done in 2018. So
Okay.
even before COVID-19, they were just looking at the side effect profile of hydroxychloroquine. All right, so the information isn't tainted at all from the politics of the disease.
Well, the reason, just to interrupt you,
what they found is,
sorry to interrupt, the World Health Organization published one in 2017, a retrospective study of all of their mass prophylaxis dosaging for malaria in Africa, and they found almost zero heart effects. And it was over 4.5 million people, I think, was part of the retrospective study. Sorry to interrupt. I thought you were speaking of that one, but...
No problem. And that's exactly right. And so in the last 65 years of use, this systematic review showed 12 deaths from hydroxychloroquine. So as you said, millions of patients, in this one, multiple millions of patients have received this medication, only 12 deaths over 50 plus years. Yet the World Health Organization, Dr. Fauci, the NIH are still, and the FDA are still putting out these cautionary statements about the heart side effects. So where are they getting this information? What is the basis? Maybe is hydroxychloroquine act differently in COVID-19 patients? Is that the kind of substance for why it's more dangerous in COVID-19 patients? Well, there's no study that actually shows that. What they have found is that in patients who took hydroxychloroquine and who had COVID-19, they had heart arrhythmias and cardiac injury. But this commonly happens in patients with COVID-19. This is part of the natural disease course. Studies have shown that between about 7 to 20% of patients with COVID-19, with or without treatment with hydroxychloroquine, have cardiac injury. And then 25% of those patients will have arrhythmias. So what they're doing is blaming these arrhythmias, which is the natural process of advanced COVID-19, on hydroxychloroquine. And that's why you're not seeing any of these studies show that hydroxychloroquine actually increases mortality, because it's not. So what they actually had to rely on was an entirely fraudulent study to support the narrative that hydroxychloroquine is dangerous. I'm sure you're well aware, but this was the study published in The Lancet. And so The Lancet is one of the most prestigious journals in the world. If studies published in that, it's almost like it's in the Bible, okay?
Right.
And what that study showed was that in patients with COVID-19 who received hydroxychloroquine, you had a significantly greater chance of dying from a cardiac arrhythmia. Independent investigators, as well as myself, quickly debunked this study, determined it to be fraudulent, determined the organization where the data was coming from, which was Surgisphere, to be a shell corporation. Okay, and this was after the World Health Organization had suspended their clinical trials because of these cardiac concerns. Dr. Fauci even went on a national interview saying, and this was right after the study was published, that it likely causes cardiovascular problems, and has never retracted that statement. And yet there still is not any evidence showing that it actually has heart problems. So to kind of answer the original question, there's really not any evidence that shows that hydroxychloroquine is going to increase your risk of having cardiac arrhythmias or serious cardiac injury from hydroxychloroquine, especially in early disease before the infection can even reach the heart and cause inflammation.
Doctor, did you read the JAMA study out of Brazil where they had very severe cardiac effects on, I think it was about a dozen elderly patients, but many people have said that they dosed those people with potentially lethal amounts of hydroxychloroquine, and JAMA has never rescinded that paper. Do you have a point of view on that one?
Yeah, so I'm quite familiar with most of the studies, and so that one, I believe they use chloroquine for the treatment instead of hydroxychloroquine. And there's a subtle difference between the two. Hydroxychloroquine generally has a safer profile, side effect profile than chloroquine. But that said, they had basically two different dosage regimens of chloroquine that they were comparing outcomes of in sick COVID-19 patients. One was kind of a typical dose of chloroquine. The other one was a really, really high dose of chloroquine. And so I think they originally expected to enroll over 400 patients in the study, but they actually only made it to 81 patients because the patients in the high dose group were dying. I think they had like a 37% mortality rate in that higher dose group. And so it's pretty clear, and so they stopped the study because it was dangerous, which, I'm not sure why they used such high doses of chloroquine. That was not what was being used by Dr. Raoul in France or Dr. Zelenko or anywhere else. And so that study didn't really tell us much. It told us, okay, if you give really high doses of chloroquine, you can kill elderly sick patients. That's what that study said at the end of the day. And JAMA should probably address that.
The same would be true with aspirin or Tylenol too, right? I mean, I think some of those patients,
yes, absolutely.
When you look at the analysis, some of them had ingested as many as 13 grams of chloroquine over a period of like 10 days. Now, this stuff has a half-life in your body of about 30 days, does it not?
Yeah, it's a relatively long half-life. I can't recall the exact, but I think it varies depending on how your kidneys function, but somewhere between 30 and 40 days.
Right. Wow. So another question from one of our viewers, and this would be, I'm a little bit bad here. Vish, you got some help with me?
Yeah.
What number am I on?
You're on question 10. I got you. Do you see it there? Question 10 from user.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Adele
1389. She asks you, doctor, why has the use of HCQ become an issue when it is acceptable under FDA policy that any doctor can prescribe an approved drug for off-label use?
Yeah, so that's another good question. And yeah, I'm wondering the same thing. But so the way prescription drugs work in the US is the FDA will look at a drug and determine if it's safe and if it's useful for some illness. Okay? And if those two are determined to be true, then the drug becomes FDA approved. Now, when physicians prescribe this medication to patients for that FDA approved indication, that's called on-label use. All right? But there's a huge part of medicine that is called off-label use. And that's where physicians will prescribe the medication to patients for a disease or illness that is not specifically indicated by the FDA. This is totally legal. This is done by a vast majority of physicians around the country every day. All right? Now, for some reason, hydroxychloroquine is now to my knowledge, the first medication that has ever been essentially banned from off-label use by governors, medical boards, pharmacies. They're restricting doctors from prescribing this for COVID-19, which is a direct infringement on the patient-doctor relationship. And this is one of the issues that we brought to the vice president. So along with a couple of other doctors, I met with the vice president in DC about a week ago. And we said that the FDA needs to clarify that physicians can prescribe hydroxychloroquine to COVID-19 patients when they see fit. And so we were successful at that level, and a couple days later, Steve Hahn, commissioner of the FDA, made an announcement saying that physicians should be allowed.
Doctor, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second. I want to keep you over briefly for the next segment so you can finish your statement, but we're going to have to take a small commercial break here. Love everything you're saying. What great information. We'll be back in just a minute.
War Room with Stephen K. Bannon. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
This is Jack Maxey sitting in the captain's seat here on Capitol Hill with my production team, Jack and Vish. We've got a series of distinguished guests here for the special Saturday show, episode 324, War Room Pandemic, National Town Hall, the case for hydroxychloroquine. We're back with Dr. Todaro, and I cut him off just before, and he was finishing a thought. So, Doctor, back to you.
Excellent. So really, the final thought was the result of our meeting with the Vice President Pence, at least at this point, was the FDA commissioner making an announcement to the American people, to physicians, to governors, that physicians should be able to prescribe hydroxychloroquine off-label for COVID-19. Now, it doesn't appear that the pharmacy boards or the governors are really respecting that announcement at this time, and so it's so important for both patients and physicians to stand up and protect that patient-doctor relationship, and that trust with the doctor to prescribe these FDA-approved medications. And again, it's absolutely unprecedented that governors and pharmacies and medical boards are penalizing doctors for prescribing an FDA-approved medication.
Now, I want to ask you one last question. You have the opportunity to sit in the Oval Office right now. You want to tell the president what he should do. We always say on this show that nothing is inevitable. Human action determines the outcome. What would you tell the president of the United States to do?
I would say as a higher level, what the president of the United States needs to do is needs to get a panel of doctors around a table, a fresh set of doctors who have been right about this pandemic from the beginning. And I myself would be happy to be there, as well as I know a team of about 5 or 6 other doctors that would love to be there. And we could talk about everything from opening up the economy, schools, immunity, and hydroxychloroquine. And I think this would give him an understanding of this disease that he's not getting from his current health officials.
Well, you know what, Doctor? You echoed exactly what Dr. Risch said on Monday of last week. So this show has volunteered 2 superior doctors and professionals in this area to go meet with the president and help get him some outside advice. I hope you're listening, DJT, because you could use the wise counsel of these men and women. Dr. Todaro, thank you so much. We can't tell you how much we appreciate. Can you tell our audience how they can follow you on Twitter and learn more about what you're saying on this subject every day?
Absolutely. So I publish almost all my thoughts on Twitter, and my handle is James Todaro MD. So that's James Todaro MD, and happy to communicate with anyone there.
Okay, listen, thank you so much, Doctor. Now, our next guest is the famous Dr. Yan from Hong Kong, one of our favorites, somebody who's been on the show several times. And Dr. Yan, welcome back.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Yan, I don't want to put you right into the question mode, but this is a town hall, so I want to get to some of these questions. This is question number 9 for the AVN crew, and this is from @GWiz. And she said, since COVID-19 is still roaming around the country, well, I think I asked her that one already. Didn't I ask you about the seasonal flu?
You asked someone else.
Yeah, this is already done.
Okay, forgive me. I apologize. Gee whiz, you almost got 2 questions thrown in there. This is question number 13. Fauci recently said that this virus is so contagious it will never disappear. Why has there been such little reporting in the National Institutes of Health on their funding of gain-of-function research in Wuhan especially, since it was known how careless these labs were in protocols, safety, etc.? In your opinion, who is to blame here?
Okay, first I want to mention that when I work in that WHO reference lab in the University of Hong Kong, we do receive a lot of funding from NIH, from CDC, from Bill Gates Foundation, all this from government. But we really need to do the annual or even semi-annual report to these funding committees. So I'm sure if NIH, they already gave the funding to Wuhan or the other institute in China, according to their regulation, they should ask for this kind of review every 6 months or every year from these institutes. But why don't you see such a report online? Then you should come to ask NIH, ask whether they didn't do the things according to the regulation, or they hide some report, or they had make some deal on their table with this kind of institute to get them avoid of this kind of report. And for the other part of this question, I think he want to mention that there may be an accident from this kind of gain-of-function labs. But I work in the P3 lab in the WHO reference lab for several years. Let me explain to you how strict this kind of management for this kind of P3 and the P3 plus lab and even the P4 lab. So basically, I can tell you after the very strict training and under the 24-hour surveillance, people come into those P3 lab or the above level lab. They are the only ones can come back alive. I mean, no animal, no other pathogens get into that lab can leave the lab alive. All the animals, all the pathogens, if they want to leave this P3 or above lab, they have to go through as a very strict inactive procedure to make it already lose the activity, or go through the autoclave. That procedure means very high temperature, very professional procedure to get it the hot enough to kill all these kind of pathogens from those garbage, dead body, all these things. So basically, if you want to believe the accident, then I can tell you that it's just the alternative choice the China's CCP government want you to believe. I can tell you, before 19th January this year, before I review this virus, it comes from PLA lab based on Zhoushan bat virus through Luda's media. Our government always try to let people believe that it's a natural origins virus come from the Huanan seafood market. But the next day, when they realize that I already reviewed this message and deliver it out, they make some kind of alternative choice that based on this kind of natural origin theory, they also have the backup plan that when people try to find out it is not from nature, they can say this is just accidental release from the lab. So that's why later they put some law to say that to enhance the biosafety issues in the Chinese labs, and also they quickly send the bioweapon general Prof. Wei Chen to Wuhan Institute and to try to clean out this evidence, take over for whole institute. For such institute, you can imagine that they are doing something. You mean, in the biosafety 4 level labs, you are doing some pathogen like Ebola, smallpox, or plague. And besides, you also can do some gain of function experiment for some unknown pathogens. You won't let this kind of biosafety issue come out because the leaders are not stupid. They know how dangerous this is. So they take the very, very strict surveillance for that. This kind of leakage, accident things are just the things Chinese government want you to believe.
Well,
so who should be accountable for? Of course, where it come from? Who should become accountable for that?
So what you're saying is essentially we're being played by every side, right? Where it came from, where it didn't come from, they've got an answer for each one of our inquiries. This sort of goes along with what we're seeing with the World Health Organization's negotiations about getting into Wuhan. Apparently, they've reached some sort of agreement, but as far as I can tell, as of this morning, they still have not actually had access to any of the labs or any of the raw data. So I see your point. One other question.
They're scared.
Yeah, they are scared. One other question that I think can allow you to elaborate on this. This is from an anonymous listener, and she says, we know from whistleblowers like Dr. Yan the Chinese leadership is taking hydroxychloroquine. Is this not a hint to the powers that be that perhaps the Chinese regime knows something that we don't?
That's not perhaps, that's definitely. I mean, the Chinese regime knows so many things they don't want the world to know. That's why they recruit their whole national power to influence the world, to influence those kind of international organizations like WHO, and also even influence the people, those professional people, I don't need to mention the names, who are in a very high position and can influence even the policy in other countries like US, right? So they have tried to do many things, but just back to the COVID-19, I can tell you the basic things is Chinese government, they don't want the people to know the real origin of this virus. They don't want you to understand why this virus can be so enhanced to target human. And they try to let you believe that this is some natural one, and also there are still no good drugs have to donate a lot of money for the vaccine, and China may be the first one to develop the vaccine who can help you. And also, they don't want you to know how to stop the spread of the virus. I can take an example based on my several months, very deep investigation during COVID-19 since the beginning. I had many firsthand of clinical data and information from Chinese hospital and also the government. The Chinese government, they don't want the people to know that hydroxychloroquine will be useful for prevention and early stage treatment. And they try to let people believe their Chinese medicine recipe, which is something, you can try to use it as possible. And also, they try to let people thought they already make the 0 cases increasement. They try to let people thought our death toll and mortality is quite low, and now China is very safe. They also try to stop the asymptomatic cases study to show that it can be harmful. People should be alarmed.
Doctor, we're going to have to cut you off right here. I'm going to hold you over. You're going to come back. We're going to take a break. I know this is fascinating. I'm not paying attention to the clock, people. It's that good. We'll be back in just a second.
You're getting back.
War Room with Stephen K. Bannon. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
This is Jack Maxey sitting in the captain's seat here on Capitol Hill. We're in the basement here at the War Room. I've got a fantastic production team here, Jack and Vish, keeping me in line, making me pay attention to the clock because I'm an amateur, as you all know. But I can't tell you how excited we are to have had this show. Our next guests are Dr. Elizabeth Vliet from Arizona. She's been a doctor for several decades. She's been on top of early treatment with hydroxychloroquine. Her specialty is preventive medicine, which makes her ideal for this topic. We also have Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin. Senator Johnson has been at the forefront of this discussion about the availability of hydroxychloroquine. He's obviously a senator who puts the interests of the people of his state before the interests of himself. We are very pleased to have two more great American patriots up here to talk to us. Dr. Vliet, are you there?
I'm here, Jack. Good morning.
Okay, and listen, I want both of you to feel free to interrupt me at any time. But Dr. Vliet, the format here is a town hall. So I've got a question for you from a viewer whose Twitter handle is @TreeRing3. And the question is, when can Americans buy hydroxychloroquine as an over-the-counter drug in a pharmacy? What would it take to make that happen? A presidential executive order? Judicial action? What is it?
Jack, that's a great question. And actually, hydroxychloroquine's been over the counter in many countries, including ones where I've done some medical work in the past in South America. There would be two possible actions in the United States that are both have legal grounds for doing it. One is the president can issue an executive order under the National Emergency Authority powers and the Defense Production Act to bypass the FDA and make it available over the counter. We sent a proposal in on that May 25th, actually, with the medical documentation on the safety of it. And Dr. Zelenko and many of us have been saying for a long time, hydroxychloroquine has one of the most impressive safety records in the history of medicine, and it's safer than Tylenol already over the counter. The second option, which many listeners probably don't know, and perhaps even some governors haven't realized, 11 governors have already bypassed the FDA and made birth control pills over the counter. And California's governor bypassed the FDA and made Gilead's Truvada, the billion-dollar AIDS drug, over the counter, and it's also paid for by Medicaid, so the taxpayers are paying for that, and it's over the counter bypassing the FDA rules. Truvada has very, very extraordinarily serious side effects, and the warnings you can look at on Gilead's website to see that. But Governor Newsom already made that over the counter in California and bypassed the FDA regulations on it. Colorado is considering it, and there's one other state considering making the AIDS drugs over the counter. And the Plan B, abortifacient or emergency contraception, that was pushed through years ago, and that is over the counter as well. And I happen to do a lot of work with hormone treatment, physiology, pharmacology. I know these drugs really, really well. And birth control pills have many more risks, actually, than hydroxychloroquine has ever been reported to have. And the birth control pills have an FDA black box warning that means for the estrogen component. And so you've actually had governors making those available over the counter without a prescription in 11 states, even with the risk of blood clots and other problems that are quite well known. And we use birth control pills all the time, but we mitigate those risks. And hydroxychloroquine doesn't have those serious side effects associated with it. So we already have two major options that have been used for other drugs with more risk and more known FDA warnings. We already have those over the counter. There's absolutely no reason that we couldn't have some courageous governors saying, look, enough of this nonsense in Washington, enough of the FDA bureaucrats and stonewalling, enough of all of the restrictions on our doctors. If the governor of South Dakota and the governor of Florida and maybe even Governor Kemp in Georgia took the lead and say, look, if we can make birth control pills and Plan B and AIDS drugs over the counter, we can let the patients decide about HCQ, and they can do it in their state and just bypass the FDA.
Well, it's interesting, for example, Dr. Vliet, you're able to buy it over the counter in any pharmacy in Mexico, for example. And one of the things that's been really crazy, as our FDA has gone out and declared this dangerous, it's no longer available over the counter in Mexico. And it's been pulled from being over the counter in a lot of places in the third world. And what we've heard several times, Dr. Risch confirmed it, I've confirmed it with listeners of ours around the world, that by declaring this common drug, the new dangerous drug of planet Earth, we're actually restricting the use of this drug in countries that have nothing to do with Dr. Hahn and the FDA, because American medicine has such a great reputation around the world. They are reluctant to prescribe this if the FDA says it's bad, and it's really quite frightening. I mean, you have doctors in Latin America, doctors in Central Africa, even some doctors in Asia who are holding back because they're afraid. They're taking guidance from Dr. Hahn. So it's not just Americans who are being kept off of this potential life-saving drug. It's 7 billion people around the world who are being gaslighted by the FDA. Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, you're exactly right. I think we have two people, Dr. Fauci and Dr. Hahn, who basically are making decisions for the entire United States and the rest of the world. And what really is absolutely malfeasance, in my opinion, is the fact that the FDA knows full well that their data is based on the most critically ill inpatient, hospitalized patients, critically ill, that were given hydroxychloroquine when the virus inflammatory cytokine storm had already done organ damage to the heart and the lungs and the kidneys and the brain. And they are using that inpatient late-stage data, and then they had the audacity to put it up on their website with a warning that says outpatient use causes harm and cardiac arrhythmias. They do not have outpatient data. They don't have outpatient data showing harm, and their outpatient data from rheumatoid patients, lupus, and malaria patients clearly shows a 65-year record of incredible safety. That is grossly misleading the American public. I think it's unconscionable. I think the president should intervene and get that warning off the FDA website. when they know that it's based on inpatient critically ill data. They were the ones that restricted it to hospitalized patients in the March 28th EUA that Rick Bright issued and restricted hydroxychloroquine. They know their data refers to in patients who are critically ill, and yet they put the warning up for outpatients. And you're right, it is hurting patients around the world. I have a lot of contacts in Argentina and Chile where I've done work, and their doctors, their patients, they're being harmed by what the FDA is doing to American citizens, plus the fact that we sent 75 million doses of hydroxychloroquine from our national stockpile that was donated for American patients by pharmaceutical companies, and we sent 75 million doses to help Brazil, and yet the FDA is denying it for our own American citizens. Most of us on the front line trying to help patients are just infuriated at what is happening.
Well, Dr. Vliet, I'm going to interrupt you real quick, but I'm going to go to Senator Johnson, but I want to add something to what you said about Brazil. It came out yesterday that not a single one of those pills has been distributed, and that the opposition, what's going on in Brazil is very similar to what is going on here. You have a progressive, quotation marks, opposition to Jair Bolsonaro, and because he said, just like Trump at the same time, that HCQ might work, it became something that was verboten inside Brazil. So what's very interesting to me is you're seeing this HCQ being used as a battering ram against these two great sort of leaders of the new world, and for the same reason, because these guys have a similar program for their people. Just wanted to get that in. Dr. Vliet, I'm going to turn to Senator Johnson here. This is a question from Carrie IP, and the question is, can HCQ qualify for use under POTUS's Right to Try Act? And we just wondering if we could apply that to this. I mean, obviously, if you've got a potentially lethal disease, it would seem to fall under the same sort of guidelines as it would be for cancer or other things. Could you respond to that, Senator?
Well, first of all, we don't need right to try for an already FDA-approved drug. And hydroxychloroquine, as Dr. Vliet and I'm sure other people in your program have been talking about, was FDA-approved back in 1955. It's been around. It's been safe. It's prescribed without doing EKGs, anti-malarial, but lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. So you don't need right to try. Doctors have the absolute right, the off-label prescription rights, which Dr. Hahn has acknowledged in publications since they issued and revoked the emergency use authorization. Dr. Hahn has written a column, definitely saying that doctors have the complete right to use their off-label prescription rights for hydroxychloroquine. The problem is again, the warnings they've given based on very late stage disease in hospital, where potentially hydroxychloroquine might prove a problem if you have coronavirus already in the heart tissues, and it might cause some heart arrhythmias. But I'm not a doctor. Hydroxychloroquine, everybody's saying, and I think the evidence would prove that it's effective early in use, probably combined with zinc. So you don't need right to try. We already have the off-label prescription rights of doctors, but those off-label prescription rights have been dramatically restricted because of what the FDA did, starting with Dr. Bright, and it continues to this day, much to all of our frustration.
Yeah, it's to our frustration, too, and also to our listeners. One other question, again, we're kind of throwing you the legislative question, Senator. I hope you'll allow me to apologize for that. This is a question from Adrian388, and it says, it's question 3 for AVN if you want to throw it up. It says, explain HR 6666 and how families can become exempt from vaccinations. Will families have this option? What will be the protocols for HR 6666, and what should we expect as citizens going forward?
Well, my understanding of that House bill, and the good news, it's a House bill, it has gone nowhere. It basically authorizes $100 billion for mainly testing and contract tracing. So I don't know how it really applies to vaccines at all. But the good news, it's a House bill. We have a majority of Republicans in the Senate. We won't pass it. President Trump won't sign it. So if you want to make sure that that House bill never sees the light of day, and by the way, it wasn't even included in Nancy Pelosi's $3.5 trillion monstrosity So probably doesn't have much chance in the House. So if you're worried about that particular bill in the House, I guess that's one of the least of your worries right now.
Okay, guys, we're going to go to a short commercial break. Isn't that what I'm hearing the music for? And we're going to be back in just a minute.
Yeah, you're not hearing things, Shaq.
And people, pay attention, because this is life or death for our country, for our health, for opening up our schools and getting ourselves back to work. Back in a minute.
War Room with Stephen K. Bannon. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
This is Jack Maxey sitting in the captain's seat here in the basement of our studio on Capitol Hill with my top-notch production team here, Vish Burra and Jack Bannon. And we've got two fabulous guests here, Dr. Elizabeth Vliet and Senator Ron Johnson. Shortly after that, we're going to have Jenny Beth Martin on from the Tea Party Patriots. But during the break, Dr. Vliet wanted to make a point concerning the FDA's ability to restrict or not restrict a doctor's right to use medications for other than stated rationales. Dr. Vliet?
Yes, thanks, Jack. Senator Johnson made a very good point that Dr. Hahn did write that column, and that was helpful. However, the governors, 46 governors with no medical training, have stepped in and restricted the doctors in their states from exercising our off-label prescribing rights. Governor Ducey went further and prevented prophylactic use, which world data shows it's effective for, and he's ignoring that. In addition, we have multiple states where, for example, New York, the Governor Cuomo restricted hydroxychloroquine to hospitals and patients only on a clinical trial. We have never had that kind of interference. So your listeners need to start lobbying their governors to stop restricting doctors from practicing medicine under existing FDA regulations. Let us treat our patients. Let doctors be doctors, and stop having the researchers drive the clinical medicine work in the field when we've got people dying, 1,000 a day. 32,347 Americans have died since July 1, waiting for the FDA, who is still stonewalling on the early outpatient use authorization for hydroxychloroquine.
Okay.
We need the governors off our back and all of that.
Boom, boom, boom. Action, people. Call your governors. Get them off the bench and get them to act on your behalf instead of on behalf of some misguided political desire to destroy the president at the expense of the American people. Now, this is a question for Senator Johnson. This is a question for all of you, really. The president talks about how his administration is doing so much to fight the virus, yet he's completely stopped talking about hydroxychloroquine. Why did he go from advocating for it and now acting like it doesn't exist? What's really going on here? And do you have any insights here?
I actually have a great deal of insight. And by the way, the president hasn't stopped talking about it. Just every advisor around him has. Bottom line is the press is powerful. And the president has been fighting the press from before he was president. The day after he became president, the press and Democrats have been trying to sabotage his administration. And they fought the fight on hydroxychloroquine. And the press so overwhelmed the president's message on this. The studies that were designed to fail were carried by the press. And I can tell you the people that surround President Trump just think it's not worth the press battle on this. And they're pointing to and they're clinging to the advancement of other therapeutics like anticoagulants, anti-inflammatory drugs, the convalescent plasma. And by the way, we are getting better at treating coronavirus. There was a doctor on, Paul Jagot was interviewing him. His name is Dr. Marty McCary from Johns Hopkins. He said because of more effective therapies, we are starting to approach, or we will probably approach a death rate close to seasonal flu, which would be a very good thing. But the people surrounding the president, they don't want to touch hydroxychloroquine with the 10-foot pole. President Trump still wants to. That's why I think just a day or two ago, he mentioned it again. But he's continuing to getting burned. So one of my pleas is yes, contact your governor. Make sure that they don't restrict the rights of doctors in your state from prescribing hydroxychloroquine. My plea is get other doctors involved. I've been banging my head against the wall with Dr. Vliet and Dr. Zelenko and Dr. Risch, but the press is trying to destroy those individuals as well. Doctors have a duty to care for their patients, and any doctor who, for example, is taking it themselves or who is trying to prescribe it for their patients, you need to get involved in this movement and speak in one very loud voice and demand your right to prescribe hydroxychloroquine off-label without any restrictions from the FDA, your medical board, or your governor, or your hospital association.
Okay, thank you, Senator, and I'd like to support that. I really do want to see doctors come out. Dr. Risch said this earlier. Courage is infectious, people. We owe it to our fellow American citizens to come out and speak the truth. Now, our next guest here is Jenny Beth Martin. We know her as being one of the courageous leaders of the Tea Party movement, and she has some very strong opinions about what should be done. Could you give us an insight on what you think the president needs to do to get this pandemic under control?
He needs to issue an emergency use authorization so that doctors can prescribe hydroxychloroquine for early and preventative treatment in outpatient settings, and go ahead and maybe even reissue it again for inpatient settings if that is needed. The FDA has done such a job. They have made it seem like this medication that has been around for 65 years is FDA approved and is safer than Tylenol. They're making it seem like it is more lethal than fentanyl. It is atrocious what they're doing. Dr. Harvey Risch has said that this could reduce the death rate, the number of people who are dying, by 50% to 3/4. Do you realize that means we could have saved potentially 104,000 lives? We can't do anything about what happened in the past, but we can going forward. This is about saving the lives of our fellow Americans. It is a safe drug. We know it is safe. It will not do harm if we give it in the doses that doctors I have talked to have recommended. If it won't do harm and it may be effective, it needs to be on the table. We need to put it on the table. And as far as what both Senator Johnson and Dr. Vliet just said, I submitted a letter at the end of last week saying that with 700 doctors from around the country asking for the same emergency use authorization, if your listeners right now go to teapartypatriots.org, they can sign their own version of this so that I can send another letter back to the White House with everyday Americans demanding the exact same thing. And it also says in it that we need to tell our governors and our local and state pharmacy boards to get out of the way of the doctor-patient relationship.
We're coming up on a hard break here.
We need to support them.
Okay, well, you heard it, people. We need to stand up. We need to take responsibility for what is going on inside our country. Call your governors. Write the president. Call the FDA. Do whatever it takes to save your fellow citizens. HCQ, we will not stop talking about it.